Hey, good afternoon, everyone. It's Lunch with California Common Cause yet again, our weekly opportunity to chat with our members and others interested in building a better and more inclusive democracy. Thanks again for joining us this week. We're always so glad to engage with you. I'm Jonathan Mehta Stein, the Executive Director at California Common Cause. Every other week, we have a guest from the democracy space. In the intervening weeks like today, I provide a solo update on what's going on here in California in the effort to build a better democracy. There's lots going on this week. I mean, lots. And so I want to hold some time here to really get through some voting stuff, some census stuff, and some redistricting stuff. But first, a couple pieces of housekeeping. First, we're hiring. I'm thrilled to announce that we're hiring a program manager based in the San Francisco Bay Area who will lead and grow and anchor local coalitions working towards money and politics reform in local Bay Area jurisdictions. We need to make the case to partners, to the public, to decision makers, that building an inclusive and equitable democracy that lifts up the voices of all of us requires creating campaign finance systems that engage and amplify the voices of regular people, communities of color, and low-income communities. Too often, our work in the money and politics space includes the usual suspects and the usual partners. And we need to build a broader coalition behind money and politics reform if we're ever going to transform the way we fund elections in our communities, in our state, and in our nation. So the new program manager based in the San Francisco Bay Area will be an attempt to invest in that work. And so please go to the Common Cause website, to the careers page. You can find a job description, and you should send it to anyone you think, any policy advocate, an organizer in your community that you think would be a good addition to our team. Second piece of housekeeping, we're off next week. I have a conflicting speaking engagement, and so it's weird to say I have a speaking engagement since every speaking engagement is over Zoom. But I'm speaking to at UC Berkeley Law School next week, and so I'll be off. We may find a way to replace me with another staff member from California Common Cause. I don't know yet, but there's a possibility we have to skip Lunch with California Common Cause next Wednesday. Okay, so let's talk substance. First, voting rights and voter access in November 2020. So as everyone knows, the nation is figuring out how to run an election safely during a pandemic. The most obvious solution, of course, is vote by mail. States around the nation are expanding access to vote by mail in order to give voters a chance to cast a ballot safely without visiting a crowded voting site. California has decided to send every voter a vote by mail ballot. Now, this has created quite a bit of controversy, with the president attacking vote by mail and casting doubt on the entire election system, thereby eroding trust in vote by mail, the election process, and possibly the election results. There's no evidence, I want to be very clear, there is no evidence that vote by mail leads to fraud. It's been in use in California since 2002, and it's used widely around the nation. There's also no evidence that it helps either political party. Now, that may shift in 2020 because it is becoming politicized, but to this point, expanding access to vote by mail, according to the data, does not help Democrats and does not help Republicans. It just helps voters, period. So, but expanding access to vote by mail is not the only change planned in California. If you've been listening to Lunch with California Common Cause over the last several weeks and months, you know this. Elections officials have been sounding the alarm that fewer locations are comfortable serving as voting sites and fewer people are comfortable serving as poll workers. As a result, California will be consolidating voting sites in many counties, offering fewer sites that are hopefully larger to allow for social distancing, but only on the condition that those fewer sites are open for 4 days or more, and on the condition that counties place ballot drop boxes around their county to provide a secure opportunity for ballot return. Now, of course, high frequency, high information voters will adapt to these changes. They will jump through hoops, they will jump over barriers, they will continue to cast their ballots. Low information, low frequency voters, however, especially limited English speaking ones, may have a harder time. They may be deterred or confused by the changing environment. Those are the folks that have the lowest voter turnout, and they have the highest language barriers. As you probably know, if you've been listening to this conversation over the course, as I said, of many weeks and many months, I've cited that 2.7 million Californians are limited English speaking eligible voters in the Asian American and Latino communities specifically. So we have more limited English-speaking voters in California than other states have voters, period. So how do we reach those voters, the ones who have the lowest voter turnout, the ones who are the hardest to engage, so they know what changes are coming in the November 2020 election? We set out to speak to them in intimate focus group settings to find out what they know about how we'll vote in November, what their preferences are for casting a ballot, and how we can best educate and engage them. The results are in a report we released yesterday called Reaching Low Propensity Voters in California's November 2020 Elections, Recommendations from Focus Group Research and Community Partner Engagement. It comes from us at California Common Cause and their Center for Social Innovation at UC Riverside, a fantastic partner we've worked with on this project over the last 6 weeks. Our focus groups included low propensity and first-time voters from Spanish-speaking, Tagalog-speaking, Mandarin-speaking, Vietnamese-speaking, Korean-speaking, and Hmong-speaking language communities, and English-speaking youth, including many first-generation voters. The participants ranged in age. They represented most major metropolitan areas across the state, including Bay Area, Los Angeles, the Central Valley, and the Inland Empire. Now, these are focus groups, and so it's not a representative survey. It does not tell us about the state of California as a whole, or even specific racial or ethnic groups as a whole, but it provides us with an intimate look into the views and the experiences of low propensity limited English-speaking voters. So for those voters, what are our findings? The option to cast a ballot by mail is particularly attractive in 2020 because of COVID-related fears about visiting voting sites, as you might expect. But trust in the mail is increased dramatically when voters are informed that they have access to a system that allows them to track their ballot online, their vote by mail ballot online. Trust in the mail among these voters is quite low, and reassurances that votes will be counted are needed. While there's greater enthusiasm for vote by mail and ballot drop-off, there are still a chunk of the population that still wants to vote in person. Among the voters we spoke with, those wanting to vote in person say it's about getting language assistance from bilingual poll workers and getting help explaining the ballot. But voters crave reassurances that voting in person will be safe, and say that elections officials should announce and enforce guidelines that include wearing masks, face shields, gloves, hand sanitizer, and other things to ensure safety among the pandemic. Also, they want to see physical distancing, social distancing at voting sites. So California needs to make voting in person safe, and then it needs to publicize those efforts to make it safe like crazy. Other keys to engaging the broadest set of California voters include using simple outreach and education materials with images, symbols, and graphics to convey information, along with limited amounts of simple, easy-to-read text. Big text-heavy paragraphs on one-pagers or flyers are not well received. Materials should be translated in all instances. There's a deep need for translated outreach materials. Videos and imagery should be demographically representative. These voters wanted to see people who look like them and include accessible, relatable settings. They want to see two voters talking to each other about how to return their ballot in a public park, for example, as opposed to an office setting. Now, reaching these low propensity limited English speaking voters is not easy. Targeted outreach efforts are going to be crucial in reaching them. And many community organizations that have been working with these populations for years know this, and they're probably rolling their eyes at me right now. But our focus groups found that the trusted and the preferred sources of election information vary, vary considerably by racial and ethnic community and by age. Different racial and ethnic groups prefer different apps or online information sources, and different age groups prefer different apps and different online information sources. Despite progressive voting laws in California, we have deep and persistent voter participation disparities on the basis of race and the basis of age. The voters we sat down with are on the wrong side of that divide. But we found that this year in 2020, they want to participate, and they know that voting impacts their families and their community. Bringing them into the electorate will require going the extra mile. We will never have a representative democracy until we do that. You can find more about our report by going to our website. Just Google California Common Cause, and you'll find our website. And on the homepage now, there should be a banner across the top that links you to the report. Okay, second, census. You may have seen that the census is in the news again. And anytime the census is in the news, I get a pit in my stomach. It's usually ominous. It's another example, typically, of the Trump administration manipulating our democratic institutions for political gain. And yes, that is exactly what's happening. The Census Bureau has reversed its plans to delay the completion of their count by 4 months and are now saying instead it will be completed 1 month early. So here's the background. Under current law, the Census Bureau is required to deliver results to the president on December 31st. The Census Bureau has made clear repeatedly that they cannot meet that deadline in order to and provide a complete count. COVID has delayed their operations too dramatically. As you probably know from past census cycles, Census Bureau enumerators, census takers, walk door to door through the neighborhood. They have usually a clipboard. This year it was going to be a tablet. And they knock on doors where they don't have a census response to get census information from people face to face. That has been delayed dramatically. It was supposed to start in the spring because it's not safe due to COVID to go door to door in the community. As a result, the Census Bureau requested that the deadline for data be extended until next April 2021. That request until this week was supported by the White House. Trump actually said in a public statement that he understood that the 2020 census had been delayed, and in order to complete it safely and accurately, they were going to ask for a major delay of the census. But now the Census Bureau is saying they're ready to finish early. So why the reversal? It may be related to Trump's June executive order to apportion congressional seats based on the number of citizens and other legal residents and excluding undocumented folks. Common Cause moved immediately to sue and to stop that executive order because the Constitution calls for the census to complete a count of all people, and excluding undocumented folks would be in violation of the Constitution. We think this move will be struck down by the courts. But if Trump can get census data from the Census Bureau and transmit it to the states for use in redistricting before he leaves office, maybe he can pull it off. Maybe he really can force states to redistrict on the basis of US citizens and other legal permanent residents and not off of a population of undocumented folks, including the population of undocumented folks. So if the Census Bureau completes the count by April 2021, as it had originally said it wants to, who knows, right? Maybe President Biden is the one finalizing the data and sending it to the states. So the Census Bureau cutting short the census count could be a ploy to match Trump's political timetable. It is a politicalization of yet another democratic institution, this time potentially with a decade of consequences. I should stop and note, if you have questions, please put them in the comments, and our staff working behind the scenes will feed those to me. Thank you for joining us. I want to return here to the census piece and just note that the blame for this is not entirely on the Trump administration's shoulders. We are here in part because Congress will not act. So Congress has the power to statutorily extend the deadline for the census count. After the Census Bureau asked Congress for a statutory change to extend their deadline from December 31st of 2020 to April of 2021, House Democrats did act. They included a provision for pushing back the census deadline in their coronavirus relief bill. Senate Republicans, however, did not include the extension in their latest coronavirus relief package. And so with this question deadlocked in Congress, the president appears to be forcing the Census Bureau to act through executive action. 4 former US Census Bureau directors published a statement saying, and this is a quote, that in their, quote, expert opinion is that failing to extend the deadlines to April 30th, 2021 will result in seriously incomplete enumerations in many areas across our country, end quote. The groups, of course, that will be hit the hardest are the groups that are behind in the census count: immigrants, limited English speakers, low-income folks, renters, the unhoused, youth, etc. The states with the largest populations of those folks will lose political representation, and they will lose their fair share of federal resources. So, as I said, it is yet another politicalization of one of our cherished democratic institutions under the Trump administration. Okay, lastly, we've covered voting, we've covered census. Let's talk a little bit about redistricting. So as you probably know, the California Citizens Redistricting Commission is in the process of starting its work. The first 8 commissioners were selected via random draw last month in July. The first 8 are extremely well qualified, and there is broad representation among some racial and ethnic communities, good African American representation, API representation. There's representation from the LGBT community, the disability community, and yet there is no Latino representation. You've probably heard us talk about this in the past. You've heard me talk about it on social media. The first 8 are now combing through the remaining finalists to choose an additional 6 who will complete the 14-member commission, and Latino representation is one of their top priorities. And so actually the meeting started on Tuesday of this week. It continued today, and it will go for as many days as necessary in order for them to make their choice of the final 6. They may actually wrap up today, this afternoon. I'm not clear on that. I was watching this morning, and they've got great choices. They really do. They're trying to add Latino representation, but they're also trying to balance geographic representation, a representation of, they're trying to bring a diversity of skills. The first 8 actually have 0 lawyers, which is surprising because lawyers tend to dominate these sorts of things. And so they want to bring some legal representation. Representation in that context means something different. They want to bring someone with a JD and legal experience onto their team. They will, of course, have counsel that they hire and staffs the commission, but they want to have lawyers on the commission itself to double check the attorneys that they hire. So they're trying to balance a wide variety of needs. But we have tried to weigh in repeatedly to say it's really, really important for the credibility of the institution as it does its work over the next 2 years and over the next decade for the Latino community, which is the largest racial and ethnic group in California, to see itself reflected in this commission and its commissioners. So we'll see where that goes. More updates to come. You can follow us for updates on that and everything else I've talked about today. On Twitter, we're at Common Cause CA. On Instagram, we're at CA Common Cause. And on Twitter, I'm at _ Jonathan Stein. I'll pause now to see if we have any additional questions or from the audience. I want to note that we are likely off next week. We may bring on a different Common Cause staffer to take my place for a conversation, but we may simply take a breather next week and join you again in 2 weeks. As always, we appreciate you and your support of California Common Cause. Thank you for joining us for these conversations where I try to report out on all the work that we're doing. We appreciate that you stand by us in the fight to build a better and more inclusive democracy. See you next week.